Great. Well, let's get started. We've got a lot to cover today. I'm excited to have this conversation, and I'm more excited to have the panelists with us today. Today, we're going to be talking about connecting across identities, communicating respectfully with people of all gender expressions. I want to acknowledge that this is an evolving conversation. We don't know all the answers, but we are hoping to start the conversation coming from HR here today. So this is an opening of a door. This topic may require some people to reimagine certain concepts. So if you start to feel uncomfortable, it's okay to step away. Turn off your camera, step away, take a moment. We sent those written materials in the email so that folks who process by reading better have those resources available. But also feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm happy to chat about this and connect you with people in our community who are doing this work. Nicole, if you don't mind dropping my email in the chat, that would be amazing. Appreciate it. And I also want to say that while I am hosting this event, I am not an expert, and that I am open to failing and I'm open to learning in this environment. And I hope that we can create a space of open minds today as we're talking, and also being vulnerable about failing as well, because that is it's possible for all of us as we learn. This space is safe for that. To create a safe learning environment, I do want us to have some guardrails for the event today. We ask you to please keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. We are recording today's event, so it will be available for you to watch later on, and also to share with your friends and family. If you have any questions during the event, I hope that you'll feel free to type them into the chat. If you're not sure if what you're saying will be appropriate, please direct message Nicole. And then we also have another expert in the room who won't be a panelist, but is here to answer questions in the chat. His name is Sean. And then if you want the whole community to have a discussion about a certain topic, please do feel free to use the chat for everyone. But words do matter, so kind words, please. If time permits, we will have a Q&A at the end of the panel today, but we may run out of time. And if that's the case, we will take note of all of your questions in the chat and we will follow up with an email later on. This space is welcoming of curiosity and growth, but know that it is not for hate or hostility. We will be actively managing attendance to foster a safe learning space today. And if this content feels triggering for you, please feel free to step away and turn off your camera if you need a moment for self-care. Like I said, we will be recording and sending out that recording later, so you will have an opportunity to watch through the content later on. Before we get going, I do want to do our land acknowledgement. UW Work Life acknowledges that we live and work on the traditional territories of the Duwamish and Coastal Salish peoples, and that we occupy this land. While we recognize that this acknowledgement does not replace authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, we hope that it honors with gratitude the land and the original inhabitants. We'll start by introducing our lovely panelists today. Kristen, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jessica. My name is Kristen Jones, pronounced she, her, and I am a registered nurse at Harborview on the Burns Plastics and Pediatric Trauma Unit. I've been on the unit for 6 years and came to nursing as kind of a second career, and have loved every minute of that experience. I'm here today to because in my family I have a daughter who is transgender, and helping her go through and continue to go through her processes has really brought an awareness to me of all the opportunities we still have to help this community. And in addition, my younger child is also neurodivergent, so really have a passion for just giving everybody an opportunity to be included and removing barriers wherever possible for that. So that has brought me here today. In addition, I've had an opportunity when I was at the University of Washington to help some amazing leaders start an LGBTQIA group called Unicorn there, which is still going strong, even 3 years later, which is great. And then continue to do work within Harborview to help increase inclusivity there as well.
Thanks so much, Kristen. So happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda Potter, she, her. I'm proud to have worked at Harborview a long time. I manage a dashboard for healthcare metrics here at the hospital, and I'm super proud of the fact that I was on the team to help adding sexual orientation and gender identity into our data, as well as race, ethnicity, and language, so we can find disparities in care. I've recently become a trainer with the Office of Healthcare Equity, a peer trainer, and we'll be teaching the gender diversity class that is offered by them the next 2 months. So if you find this information interesting and you want more, please look at the Office Healthcare Equity website. And my passion for this came because I have a daughter that we've helped transition, and she now works at Montlake and doing well, and I'm super proud to be a UW employee and to see my child supported through the same program. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And Val?
Hi folks, I'm Val. I use she, her, they, them, and she pronouns if you're a Tagalog speaker. I'm queer, I identify as mixed, and I am the interim director at the University of Washington Q Center, which is the LGBTQ resource center at the University of Washington Seattle campus. I've been with the University of Washington since 2016 as a graduate student, and have been with the Q Center from a student employee to now a leadership position since 2018. And I'm really excited to be here today and share space with you all. I'm very grateful to be able to connect with colleagues across the university system and campus and talk more about gender justice and how we can create more inclusive and affirming environments for students, faculty, and staff at all levels of the university.
Thank you so much, Val. And I realize I did not introduce myself. My name is Jessica Cole. I am the director of UWHR Work Life, and I am someone who identifies as a queer cisgender woman. And I have 3 amazing kids, to which I am their single mom, and one is a trans kiddo and one is a neurodivergent kiddo. So that is why I'm here today, and so excited to have this conversation. So without further ado, let's get the questions started. So first, let's talk about, panelists, why is language so important?
I'll start. I mean, this seems like a simple question, but it's not, right? We all handle language that comes at us all day. Sometimes the language rolls right off our back, and sometimes it doesn't. And I've definitely found that the more times you have language that's upsetting hit you in the course of a day, it starts to feel more, right? And this is also how we bond with people and how we get to know one another. And so it's super important that we're aware of what comes out of our mouths, even though at times, you know, we all put our foot in it.
For me, I think language is really the site where we do a lot of connecting and building those relationships, and also creating our own sense of self and inviting folks to understand ourselves better, our communities better. And it's just a really transformative way of engaging and relating to the world around us. But also, I think it's really important to use it with intention and care, and also understand that the languages that we use inform the ways that like are shaped by our value systems, are informed by the ways that we've been socialized, that we've been educated, and sometimes that includes like having an unlearning process about the language we use to be better and show up better for our communities.
I love the way you put that, Val. Really, the transformative piece of communication is a huge element for me and why I think language is so important. As you said, it gives us an opportunity to learn and to grow and to sometimes have those difficult conversations on behalf of ourselves or on behalf of others, to help others realize that sometimes words can be said with an intent that lands with a very different impact. And sometimes if you haven't had an opportunity to experience that type of impact, it can sometimes take someone else opening your eyes to those opportunities. So language really is a gift when wielded with respect and intention.
Can we maybe have some examples of what that looks like and where language becomes really especially important that we want to share today? And while you're thinking about that, I realize I did not introduce Sean Johnson today, who is here with us.
While they're thinking about it, I could just my name is Sean Johnson, and him and I am the program director for the UW Medicine Transgender and Gender Non-Binary Health Program, along with the clinical director, Dr. Karine Heinen. And we started this program about 5 years ago now, trying to expand offerings, but also are kind of charged with educating our quite large system in language and a number of other things so we can improve our patient interactions and strive towards equity and inclusiveness with our care delivery that continues to grow.
Thank you, Sean. I think that we, in our planning process, we're talking a lot about, a lot of us are here to be more inclusive in our practices, both at home, in our communities, and at work. And language is a really important mechanism that we can use as individuals to show that we care about the people around us, especially in this way. So later on, we will talk about scenarios, but we came up with this thought of, words can be the building blocks of inclusion. They can be what makes people feel appreciated and seen and valued. Any other thoughts from the panelists before we move on to the next slide?
Well, none of us like for our names to be mispronounced, right? My last name is Potter. I get mad when I get called Porter. And that's just a simple example, right? And if it were something that really felt part of your identity, you can see how that would hurt more over time. So yes, I mean, I think we can all find practical examples in our lives when someone might have said something that they didn't even realize was going to hurt you, but it did.
Yeah, and imagine just, if it's that one moment in a day where someone uses the incorrect last name, but if you had it all day long and every single person was using the wrong last name all day long, I think I would get to the point where I'd just be like, stop, like, please just read my last name. And that's the same thing with pronouns. It's a part of someone's identity. And it could be that you're not the first person to misgender someone else in their day.
And for me, I think not getting too much into like sociolinguistics, but a lot of erasure, invisibilization, a lot of things happen at the site of language. And I think language liberation, language justice is inherently tied to gender justice, racial justice, decolonization. And the only ways that we can write and speak ourselves and our ways of being into the world is using language and also being seen our communities and our loved ones, and being recognized with the language we use for ourselves in affirming and validating ways. And that also disrupts like language that is harmful to us and that has been imposed upon us from external forces, and by dominating systems. So I think language is just can be a site of both harm, but also of care. And what does it mean to transform our communities, our kinship networks, and inevitably like our futures to be more affirming and validating of many ways of being in the world, than through language itself.
And I think another aspect of language is not just what is spoken, but also what is written, and the ways in which we communicate in a written form can sometimes invalidate certain people. To Val, I think you were sharing when we were planning of certain events, or it can place certain assumptions in ways that that make people feel unwelcome. And so the written word is just as important as spoken as well. So so as you kind of think about communicating as a whole, it does include all forms of language.
I think that's a great segue into our next slide. How do we turn this into action?
I won't lie. The avoid sir is one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with, right? We've also talked recently about the supposedly gender neutral you guys, right? And that may, again, your intentions may not be to upset someone, to be mean to someone, to be rude to someone, but what we're trying to do as active allies and members of this population is to mitigate those opportunities, right? And try to pull that language that has questionable, and maybe it didn't always, but questionable aspects now out of our common lexicon. So we don't unfortunately do that to someone, because we wouldn't want it done to ourselves, right? But I get it, it's hard. It can be very difficult to get used to that at first.
I think it's interesting. I see in the chat that someone's referring to using the conjunction of y'all, and Kristen and I had an interesting conversation about that. Kristen, did you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in the Southeast United States, and I spent a lot of childhood around sir and ma'am, and that is very much ingrained in me. And it is still something that I am working towards, working away from my language. But actually, the piece that I am working on most actively currently is bringing y'all into my vernacular. And the reason was, as growing up, I had an association negatively with that terminology, and made every effort to not do it, because most of my family was using it. And so now I'm just having to reverse and to relearn, and I mess up and I don't get it right, and I try to apologize if I don't get it right. And just now, like I said, just relearning and trying to bring this into my vocabulary with a new and loving connotation attached to it, instead of the negative one that I held for so long.
Similarly, I grew up in Texas, and I also come from like a military family. And so, yeah, using very gendered titles and greetings was very much part of my upbringing. But also, as I came into more of an adult consciousness and understanding of my own gender journey, started to stick with me like, oh, there's a lot of assumptions made when those gendered associations and titles are used for you, or to refer to you without that person necessarily knowing like your gender identity or how to relate to you. And it can be really challenging to just like navigate all of kind of those microaggressions, micro invalidations on a day-to-day basis. A recent instance I've had of being misgendered was getting PCR tested at one of the COVID drive-ins. And I recently changed my hairstyle and cut it shorter. And I was wearing a mask and was in the passenger seat with my partner. And one of the testers was like, "Excuse me, sir," to get my attention. And I was like, this is an instance where I very much know that "sir" is not for me. And I do not like to be referred to using that term. And I think there's like so many instances where people are misgendered, not just by using Mr., Miss, but so many other terms in our language, and just being more cognizant of how we kind of throw that around, and the assumptions we make about people just based on appearance, I think is really, really important. And to start being a little bit more aware of how we're using language in everyday life and our interactions with people.
I love some of the questions that we're getting in the chat around pronouns and kind of their the appropriateness of how to use those, whether we're in a gender-related space or not. And I think something to realize is that every space that we're in, because of the societal culture we're brought up in, is a gendered environment. So whether it has clinical application or not, because of the way our language is structured, we're going to use gender in some way, shape, or form. So really to think about the fact that asking somebody's pronouns is just fully informing yourself of who that person is. And if you aren't yet comfortable introducing yourself and your pronouns, and then asking in return for that information from the person you're speaking with, it's always okay just to use someone's name. If you're ever unsure or you're ever uncomfortable, or as you do this work to get more comfortable with it, because at first it does seem weird when you make this transition to, "Hi, I'm Kristen, my pronouns are she, her, what's your name and pronouns?" It will eventually become much more fluid and much more normal to you with time and practice. But until you get to that place, names are a wonderful way to kind of bridge that gap.
One of the things Val has taught me recently is more about societies that have non-gendered pronouns, like the folks of the Philippines. And I kind of love that idea. And I've really tacked onto it recently and think, we get all upset about the they, them, because it's plural in our minds. But where do we develop, how do we develop the idea of a singular pronoun that is gender neutral, if that's the crux of the problem, right? Like, that's the beautiful thing about language, is it evolves and changes. And so I'm excited to see maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, more pronouns that can offer that gender neutral singular person concept that is part of the struggle that some folks have with pronouns at this point.
Yeah, and I would say, like, we're using English right now, and English is kind of a constrained language, in that there are some words and pronouns and nouns that are gendered, and then some that are not, and we can kind of piece together different ways of creating more gender neutrality or genderless descriptions. But there are also so many linguistic systems and languages in the world that are genderless, non-gendered, not gendered in the same binary structure as English. So I just want to create some more expansiveness for that, and also with relating to people, folks' heritage languages might not map over in the same way as like Western or English speaking terms do. And so really thinking about gender expansiveness and the ways that we talk about gender, are pretty constrained within the English language system itself.
I like the pronoun identification. I wear that on my badge. I specifically started wearing that because I wanted to be a safe person. If I'm in the hospital and someone's lost and they don't know who they can ask and are nervous about that, if they see that, they can say, "Oh, at least this person's aware of a pronoun and might be helpful to me. So, and nowadays I see little enamel pins you can get and really cute art. So you can use it as a way to be expressive and not just be informative.
I also saw someone, I think someone in the chat mentioned in a customer service interaction how to address someone if you don't know their name or aren't familiar with them. Something I've been doing in like email communications, like within my office and dealing with students and just anyone that's like a new visitor to the Q Center, is just saying hello in an email or anytime we do marketing and communications and outreach. Why include a name? Why include a gendered honorific when you could just have a greeting, and then once you receive feedback or receive a message back, looking at someone's signature or what their sign off is and going off of that. Because even on our like the Google Suite system, sometimes it defaults to folks' legal names or dead names. You just don't know. So I think even in that kind of customer service instance, especially in this heightened like digital era, even just saying a greeting and like leaving it blank until you receive more information in order to better relate to folks. And I think that just creates more spaciousness and openness for people to be engaging with you and inviting you to learn more about them.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of going along with those electronic forms, the reality of the UW system is that currently it is not the most inclusive system. And there are many of us on this call, as well as many that are not here that are doing work to help improve those things. But one of the things that I have tried to do as I interact with stuff, both within UW and outside, is to recognize opportunities for improvement and to make sure that I've pointed those out to people that, whether it's my manager, so that I can try to find a contact of somebody who might own that tool to try to get it updated. Surveys have been a big one for me. Every time I take a survey and it asks for gender, it's almost always wrong. And so I tend to reply to those surveys and ask if I can be put in contact with somebody who can help me to improve the representation of genders on that survey, and policies and forms. And there are all kinds of opportunities. Recently, I was in the process of applying for a new job and found that there was a limiting only male and female option within that process. So trying to do the work to help improve things as well in the technology aspect of our systems is something that is a way of just helping to improve communications for people who might be down the line as well.
I love the fourth bullet, and this is something I've also worked on. And it came up a lot around the holiday season, right? So many people came back in January and was like, how was your holidays? Did you travel? Did you see your family? And why those seem innocuous questions for those folks that don't like the holidays, don't have a family, maybe are estranged from our family. What do they say, right? You kind of put them in an awkward situation to either give you the truth, which you may not want to hear, because it might be hard, right? Or to lie to you. And so I've been trying to be more conscientious about saying, did you enjoy your time off? Did you get to spend some time with people that you care about, right? And sort of pull out the sort of gendered family expectation, the sort of traditional aspects of our society that may not be the same for everyone as it is for you.
And I'll offer for the fifth bullet. I work in a clinical environment. So for on my particular unit, we do gender affirming surgeries. And we recently had a patient who was a first type of that surgery for Harborview. And in that environment, there was a resident who came by who honestly was probably trying to learn, but they did not think about their actions and how that might actually impact the patient, and came to ask to look at what had been surgically modified on this patient. And when the patient asked why, the person said it was out of curiosity. And so there is a time and place for learning within our environment because we are an educating institution. But as I hope you all might imagine, that was not a great experience for the patient. And so I just offer this as an example of, we in our words and our actions, and talking about things that are not part of care or are not within your scope, are very important. And so if you wouldn't walk up to a cisgendered person and ask them to see XYZ, then you should not be doing that, with a person who might have a different gender presentation. So I just offer that as an opportunity to kind of reflect on, though it's an extreme example and much smaller examples happen in a day-to-day communication world, because of the breadth of what the University of Washington supports. It's important to think about it across the spectrum, from simple communications back and forth to something as extreme as the situation that we had on our unit.
I'd like to add something, and I recognize I'm not a panelist, but as a parent to someone who's a trans man, it's the work that we do to take gender out of our greetings and our interactions with people, customer service, the people that we love, the people we work with, our community members, has such a huge impact. Like when my kiddo gets misgendered in public, we have a whole process that we go through when we get home to recover from that. And you can just see the pain that they feel, that he feels. Oh, makes me want to cry. And so it may feel uncomfortable, but the impact that you have just by saying, like, when we walk up to a cash register and the person working there says, how are you doing today, ladies? That we have hours of recovery to do from that. And if they would have just chosen to say, how are you doing today, y'all, or folks, it would be a much easier time.
I've got an interesting reverse side of that story, Jessica, which is when my daughter was early in transition, we went to a concert, and the bartender or the drink provider properly gendered my daughter, and she didn't believe it at first, right? She proceeded to tell me this whole elaborate story about how that person must have looked at her and determined she was transgender and was trying to be nice to gender her properly. So not only can these words hurt, but they can also not be believed at first, right? And so it took us a while to help me talk her to understanding that I doubt that person was that conscientious, right? And then I'm glad, but the reason why is that that's the way they saw them, right? And so it's interesting that we see this as folks in this population are dealing with transition. It comes on both sides, right? So this is just an interesting way that we all grow over time and how we learn to trust that we are who we are.
Yeah, Amanda, my daughter, she had a situation where she was pulled over. Maybe she had gotten in a car accident, possibly. I don't remember her being at fault, but a police officer at that time, she had not had her legal name change done. So her driver's license was still in her birth name. And the police officer came up and introduced themselves and asked for driver's license, and went back to their vehicle and came back and and before proceeding said, I have your ID here, but I would like to know how I can best address you today. And that gave her the opportunity to provide her name, and he used her proper name for the rest of her interaction. And that really affected her in a positive way.
It was surprising given law enforcement. I'm also thinking, because I used to be an intern at the Office of Civil Rights with Race and Social Justice when they were working with the police department around their racism and the strategies. We had that when was it Congress? I forget. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on that name. When we were not in charge or managing our own police department, right? There was a lot of training there, and I'm so surprised and pleased to see that it's impacted further down the road. But I just wanted to contribute in terms of language, right? Yes, it can be super amazing. It can be positive and negative, right? Depending on what's going on, but it's also about safety, right? Whether it's in a hospital or a classroom or whatever, is that you never know who's around, right? So it's likely a slip up in that interaction between the two of you, but whoever caught that, it may not be over, right? So we know this community experiences bullying, especially in their youth, right? And violence. And so when we think about that, especially in a hospital system, where we think about, well, is their rooming patient going to be knowledgeable, and what will their response be, right, in this system, or a number of things. So it's also about safety. So yes, it has interpersonal, obviously, interactions, but it can put people in danger depending on, what's around.
And just to add to what you were saying, Sean, yeah, as someone that grew up in Texas, and I interact with a lot of students that have come to the University of Washington seeking sanctuary from states like Texas and Florida, and places where there's a lot of anti-LGBT and especially anti-trans laws currently. There is a lot of anxiety about folks being socially or going through social transition within their campus community and friendships and networks here, but worrying about new names and things being disclosed to family or potentially like other authorities in their states of residence or where their families of origin are located. And it is a big safety issue. So really tread with care and really tread carefully with, just disclosing any of that kind of like data and using like naming practices. It can be very affirming for folks, but also recognize like not everyone is out to everyone else, and like what does it mean to potentially put someone in harm's way by using names, pronouns. And I think it's great to have a culture where we're talking about these things at UW, but also recognize that we have a student population from all over that come to UW specifically because of the levels of protection and safety that we have here and in the state of Washington, but that's not the case for where people's residences are necessarily across the country or across the world.
So I did advance the slide because I feel like we have naturally gravitated towards this part of the discussion. We have talked about a couple of these scenarios, but maybe we can run through them. Scenario one, we talked about this, like at the Department of Licensing, when you don't know someone, how does that scenario look? I'll leave it up to the panelists on whether they want to further address scenario one, but maybe we should talk about scenario two. And that is if you're in a group meeting with coworkers, direct reports, or students. And I specifically want to call out, and this is something we talked about in planning, when there's a power dynamic imbalance.
I mean, I'll just remind everyone that, first of all, you may not know about people that are reporting up to you. And I'll also say that keep in mind that your direct reports and students may want a recommendation from you, may want a good review from you, may want opportunity for advancement, and so may choose to squelch any criticism or suggestion back to you that you could do better because of those reasons. And so that power dynamic definitely sets up more onus on the person with power in the situation.
And it can be super facilitated, right? As the person in power, as the person that's hiring or mentoring, providing care, I mean, obviously from my perspective, it's so easy just as the world is changing, when we can introduce ourselves with our pronouns and just set that standard, you don't have to worry about missing that and then having to have that second interaction of someone let you know you haven't asked that or you got the wrong one, etc. So it's almost just like by modeling. If we can model our own, like being transparent and like this is my identity, etc., with others, right? That will be mirrored. And for folks that are say for folks that are less aware of the shift, we see in terms of the hospital side, we see a lot of folks from the older generation that are more of the pushback. But why are you asking me what my pronoun is, right? Because they're just maybe not attached to folks that are having these conversations more regularly, like we would see in the younger generations, right? And so they're just unfamiliar with it. But if we can get them to model it, or if we model it ourselves, they'll just not even hear it. It's like, oh yeah, but my name's Matt, and they probably won't say their pronouns, right? But for the folks that need that looking for that light and starting to try to establish trust with you, especially in a position of power as an employee, a student, etc., that is their opening of like, okay, they at least know like they have some idea of things, but they've also set a tone that everybody can walk into. So it's just so much easier if folks can just do that.
Agree with the modeling and with the facilitation, Sean. And just to add on to that, like, even if you're not the manager or supervisor that's like leading a training or having a staff meeting, there are all other ways to also model, like putting your pronouns in your Zoom, putting it on Canvas, or whatever systems you use, in your email signature, just to signal and kind of model that for your staff and team and start creating and cultivating that culture, and normalizing it. And yeah, and then addressing, yeah, it's an invitation for folks to also take part in that, but also not putting the onus necessarily on our gender expansive like community members to do that necessarily, and also like yeah, take a little bit of that burden off of folks from disclosing that if they don't want to. But modeling it in so many different ways, I think, is so powerful, and it shifts the culture really.
And wow, like choosing to disclose your pronouns, like in the Zoom room, like today, it should not be that as leaders we force people to disclose their pronouns. As with it probably is that the intention is that you want to make it a more inclusive environment, but the truth is that being transgender in our society comes with risks, and so it should be up to the individual to disclose that to us and to their team. And so never ask that people disclose their pronouns. Just create an environment that's safe for that by you, if you feel comfortable disclosing yours, is my advice.
Now, like real world, I guess, kind of application to that would be whenever you're like opening a Zoom room, making sure your settings are like allow folks to rename themselves and include pronouns, and also letting folks know that like the identity UW system exists if they want to set their names and pronouns kind of automatically within Zoom, but also making sure that the settings in Zoom or Google Meet allow for folks to be able to like change and write themselves into existence that way if they so choose.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that gender identity, like sexual orientation, shifts, right? So especially like when we think about folks that their gender identity is gender fluid, meaning it can shift one day, to the next, etc. So it's not like oh, well, we heard your pronoun yesterday, so we're good to go forever, right? That we always are allowing folks an opportunity every time we're in a meeting or whatever, right? With those intros, I usually say like how your name, essentially your role, and how you'd like us to address you. For me, my concern is I want folks to make it an inclusive space. So I don't want folks to not pay attention to pronouns so we never talk about them, right? But then there's the folks that it could harm. So creating that option of how would you like to be addressed? Meaning we can address you by your name today. We can address you by your name and pronoun. How would you like to refer? So it allows for both flexibility day to day, but also not pressure or onus on anybody to have to, but also can't not engage either.
Someone in the chat, I think it was Lewis, brought up a really good point about what if I'm the one without power and my supervisor or direct report or my person above me is the person that's doing this, right? Either to me or someone around me. And you know, that's tricky, right? I absolutely agree that's tricky. Here's my best advice, and this could be wrong, but this is what I would think, right? I would hope that if I made this mistake the first time, that individual would come to me and in a private moment say, hey, I just wanted you to know I prefer she, her pronouns, right? And try to keep it low key, but also be brave enough to say something. But that may not solve the problem, right? And you may not trust that person enough to be able to say that. You may not also know if it's happening to someone with you, as in scenario 4, if that person is out to the folks around you. And in most situations with scenario 4, I hope you'd step up and say, no, Mark, this individual uses these pronouns, right? Please use the right name. But that situation gets really tricky. And I appreciate that at times that person may not want you to tell that information about them. And so this situation, it takes a bit of context. And a bit of carefulness. Now, I'll admit that if it's the 5th time it's happened in a row in a room, and we all know that they're not doing their best, that's when I'm not afraid to speak up and say it right in public there and say, you need to be careful about what you're doing. But I appreciate that there's levels of safety, and you'd have to be careful because you wouldn't want to, as we've discussed, make someone feel unsafe in this environment or create more harm in the long run.
Yeah, and I would just, go for it, Val, go for it.
I think someone brought this up in the chat earlier, but also want to say that, like, depending on who your supervisor is, like intersectionality is a thing and folks have different levels of experience with this language, and also English might not be their first language, and so it might be hard for them to like translate your pronouns or your gender identity and what you're sharing with them in a way that's like accessible for them in their heritage language. So I think having a little bit of curiosity and compassion, and then maybe a conversation with your supervisor, and if you feel like you're not gaining any ground there, an ally, that's a colleague, to be able to like kind of call them in. So then the power imbalance there is a little bit disruptive, but having someone that's in your workplace that kind of understands the situation and can talk to them and help maybe guide them to like understanding to and stop misgendering you could be supportive. And I think also just in general, like documenting things is always a great practice for anyone in the workplace anytime you're experiencing any form of harassment or potential discrimination. So just like keep track of those instances, the amount of times that you have talked to your supervisor, have asked colleagues for support, and then there might be ways through HR and other systems to also seek support that way too. But it is challenging, and also tread with care because people, it's hard to access the English language and how we talk about ourselves, especially if that's not someone's first language or primary language.
That's a great point, Val. So I was just going to add, on our unit, we're currently trialing a tool that was created. It was created at UCSD, but it's part of the School of Nursing, and it's called HEALS, and it was built for a classroom environment. So we're working on kind of the aspects of it in a clinical environment, but we do hope that it might become a tool that could be used throughout the University of Washington. But really the crux of it is to assume positive intent, especially if it's the first time having this situation, and really focusing on calling people into conversations as kind of that, with that transformative lens, that because as Val said, intersectionality is a huge piece to this puzzle, as well as just people who haven't experienced it yet. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you find out that you don't know it. And having that first conversation be a compassionate one that's led with curiosity and with the goal of enlightenment really is the best way of potentially inciting change in someone that will stick for the long term. And but being, if you are a bystander in that situation, having that the person who has had harm done to them is always the center of working through that process. So making sure that you acknowledge to that person, whether it be privately or if the situation calls for it, publicly acknowledging their harm, and then having that conversation with a person who may have misgendered or properly, improperly used terminology, and really approaching it from the place of calling people into a conversation first. And then, as Val said, obviously escalations may be necessary if those approaches don't work. But having those difficult conversations and approaching them with curiosity and with the hope of positive intent and transformation really can be helpful in trying to start those conversations. And sometimes just approaching somebody and saying, this is going to be a difficult conversation, and I just need your patience and time to listen to what it is that I have to say. So whether you are the person harmed or the person who is speaking on behalf of somebody else, that can be a great way kind of into that conversation.
I've also found, especially in like busy, where say like a sidebar separate conversation there's not time for that right now, right? What I've seen work and have used myself is just remodeling the correct situation, right? So like I'm on the hospital side, so you're going through your daily roster with your providers. They're giving you kind of like the day-to-days, to-dos, and what's going on with each patient, and you notice that they use the wrong name or wrong pronoun. I just reinforce it when I believe that the patient is named this or whatever, right? But the patient isn't hearing this, but reinforcing it with our staff and stuff as we go. But even in a patient room, we actually have like a scenario video where it's the same kind of thing. A nurse is handing off, trying to update the oncoming nurse, like what's going on with his care, and makes a mistake. So they just stop, like the patient is just viewing, right? Like listening to the conversation that the two are having. And the one, which is me in this video, is they use they. So we didn't have to have, don't you know, why are you messing up, right? I just reminded the person that this is the correct one. We can get into outside of the patient purview, student purview, worker purview, like, hey, maybe we need to like practice this, etc. But sometimes just like getting them right back on the right track of this is the name and pronoun, they'll model what you just did. And sometimes it is just they forgot in that quick second and they didn't intend for that, and remind them, and then the rest of the conversation will be correct. So sometimes if you don't have time for a full-on step off, let's have a conversation, just that is a quick, let's get us back into the right space.
I'm going to quickly insert that we are at 12:56. We have 4 minutes left, and I feel like this has been such an amazing conversation, and I hate to interrupt, but I also want to talk about what happens when we mess up. And so we won't be able to get to takeaways, the takeaway slide, because I think this is so important to talk about, but I will promise to email it out right after the event today, what the takeaways from this session is. So panelists, if you could tell us, what do we do if we mess up? Or when we mess up, because it's bound to happen.
It's going to happen.
Quick apology. Don't make it about you. Apologize to the person, correct the behavior, move on. I think is the best way to go about it.
Yeah, it happens to all of us. I mean, we all do it sometimes accidentally or maybe not. So, but yes, correct yourself and move on and do better the next time is really the best advice.
What we also, when we do our larger training, we know for some folks, this is way, like some folks are more familiar with this and it's not a heavy learning curve or a steep learning curve, and some really, they're not familiar. So for folks that are nervous, like they want to do the right thing and they are worried about it, what we usually kind of coach to is you can almost like plan for a mistake in the sense of, if I make a mistake, please interrupt me, correct me, remind me, so they know that they're not waiting for you to stop talking and be like, oh, by the way, right? That you've already given them an entryway because you want to be attentive to this, right? And that'll go a long way even, so that if a mistake does happen, they know that it's not intentional, right? That they have a better understanding of the intent, even though the impact is the same.
Yeah, I love all those points. The only other thing I would offer is, I know I personally am a nervous laugher. Like I can sometimes have a giggle when I mess up something. And so just kind of trying to also be aware that if somebody is, you know, kind enough to call you on a mess up, to just watch your body language and maybe your inadvertent body language as well.
And I love in the chat that folks have shared about practicing. Practice, I don't like to say practice makes perfect because that's an unattainable ideal, but practice builds confidence and practice makes folks better. So I will leave it at that.
Love that, Val.
We all make mistakes. I live with all the time and love someone deeply, and I mess up their pronouns on the regular and apologize, and just know that I can forgive myself and it's okay to correct myself, and I will work hard to do whatever I can to be as supportive to that person as possible. So know you're not alone and give yourself grace. None of us are perfect. So it's 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much to our panelists. I so very much appreciate your expertise, vulnerability, your lived experiences. It was wonderful to hear from you. I invite you to hang out for the next 15 minutes or so, just in case people want to stay after and chat. We are going to stop recording now. So if anybody wants to stick around and talk, we would love to hear from you.